My face looks so much bigger than yours.
Okay, I think we're on, Tony. Thank you for that comment. Let me see.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to StreamYard, and you're on the Pencilish.com site, YouTube's page, right?
We're live. I was just checking that out over here, Tony. It looks like we are
live.
And I have to mute that. Hold on. We're live. I was just checking that out over here.
Oh, that's surreal. That's like you in the past talking to you.
So there's a little bit of a delay, and we are also on our Facebook page for Pencilish. So thank you for joining us there if you're joining on that. But as I can already see, we're already over here. We're going to have chat going. And what we're going to do today, guys, is we're going to interview our friend Chris Sanders. More on that in just a second.
Legendary Chris Sanders.
Legendary.
We'll get to the big, setup for him because that's a vast one.
It's vast.
It's vast and wide.
And so save your comments at the end. We will have some Q&A at the very end, and we'll try and squeeze in a few questions. I think we're going to have a really good time hearing some hopefully really secret behind-the-scenes kind of info from Chris.
I can't wait.
Chat, Tony.
This is
you can do the introduction right now.
This is something that we've been waiting for a long time. So I'll start now. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Bancroft Brothers Animation Podcast. I'm Tony Bancroft, and
I'm Tom Bancroft.
And we together are the Bancroft Brothers. Weird, huh? Anyway, we have an animation podcast we've been doing for a long time, but today we come to you live. Yes, live. If you're listening to this recorded, you're going to call me a liar, but we were live today on 9/11 in 2021, and coming to you from Lightbox Expo, which we're a part of this weekend. We've been celebrating that all week long. It started on Tuesday, and it's, of course, because of the coronavirus and all that, it is online, and we're happy to be with you guys online because our reach is a lot wider now, being on Tom's Pencilish.com YouTube site, and so we're happy to be here with you guys.
And Tony, you mentioned it already, and I'd like to just take a really quick moment before we bring in Chris, is just to say it's September 11th. And that's obviously a very big date for us here in the United States. When you hear this later on our Bancroft Brothers podcast, this will already be in the past. But right now we're live on September 11th, and we just want to remember those people that lost their lives, the families that have been affected for the last 20 years. And all those people that firefighters and policemen and healthcare workers that really gave their lives or risked their lives during that time.
For sure. I'll just say I agree with that. It's something that we should never forget. The fact that our country had that horrible tragedy happen. And it brought us together. There was a unity that came out of 9/11. And I think it's something that Tom and I would love to see remembered because people came together. It's something our world needs a little bit more of, I think, is coming together right now. So let's do that in honor of the tragic victims of 9/11. Let's be together. Mm-hmm. Today, we're going to talk about animation, though, and it is something that we are all passionate about and love. And so it'll be easy to get into that in just a minute. We have some sponsors, some supporters of our podcast, and I am just popping peas all over the place. Sorry. One of which is StuartNGBooks.com. We want to thank Stuart for being a longtime sponsor of the podcast. StuartNGBooks.com is where you go as a resource for all of your creative book outlets. If you want to be inspired and as an artist, and see what some of your favorite artists are doing in the way of sketchbooks and published works, even original artwork that Stuart offers. Go to StuartNGBooks.com and you'll be able to find all those things there. He has signed editions, which are really cool. Why, he's even at Lightbox virtually this year, and he's selling away, I'm sure, but also probably collecting all the cool things that he sees being posted by his artist friends. Stuart's in the know so that you can be too. He's got all the stuff from all over the world, Europe included, that you've never seen anywhere else. So grab a hold of that. Give it as gifts. You got books and stuff you can give as gifts. StuartNGBooks.com.
And real quick, another sponsor that is a part of Lightbox Expo right now is Sketch Wallet. Sketch Wallet is our good friend, Ralph Thomas, and we're just happy for him that he's doing so well. You can go to sketchwallet.com and see all of the different kinds of materials he uses. He has wallets that are leather and canvas and all kinds of things. And then he also has all kinds of different sizes. And of course, each one has a little sketchbook in it, a nice quality sketchbook. It also has a little stubby pencil. And of course, place for your, what is it, $3, Tony? That's what we always have to have.
Yeah, the animator has to have $3 in there. It's not quite enough to pay for lunch for somebody, but it's enough to show that, okay, I have some money. I just can't get the bill. Can you get it for me?
It's maybe enough to buy a black coffee. That's about it. Yeah. And of course, there's a stubby pencil so you can draw wherever you are. Okay. So if you want to put in the chat that you have a sketch wallet, I'd love to see that. But in the meantime, Tony, let's get going. We have somebody waiting in the wings that we have a little green room here, and he's been waiting patiently. I think he's drawing, but this is Chris Sanders. And Chris Sanders is an animation legend, somebody we've been trying to get for quite a while to be on this show. And we are honored to have him right now. Let's bring on Chris Sanders.
Yeah, welcome to the show, Chris.
Hey, how you doing?
Thanks for joining us. Tom and I are going to try not to gush too much on you, Chris. I want you to be prepared a little bit, though, for the fact that, we were talking off air a little bit about how we grew up underneath you, not physically, of course, that would probably be painful for us. But as young little tykes in Cal Arts and going to art school, we had heard story, rumor, gossip about the fabulous Chris Sanders. And we really looked up to you for a long time. Later on in life, I got to work with you on Mulan. We also worked together on Beauty and the Beast, Lion King. Oh my gosh, probably even more than that I'm forgetting. And so you've been a huge, huge influence on us. So thanks for being here with us today.
Yeah, big time. So Tony, we could go through your long, and really, Chris, what we want to do, and we kind of mentioned this to you earlier, is we're not going to just throw out a film and say, what's the story behind it? But we do want to kind of hear some of these behind the scenes stories that we heard even as young animators or still at Cal Arts, because you had left Cal Arts. And one of them, I'm going to start right off the bat, Tony.
Sure, get it.
And say, because there's so much to talk about, I want to dive in. Your Cal Arts years. So one is, how long did you go? Did you finish and go all 4 years?
I did. I was not overly anxious to start working.
Really? That's interesting.
I wasn't. I was yeah.
You love school. You love the camaraderie?
I just wanted to finish. And I know that at that time, quite a few people were leaving early. And right as I was finishing Cal Arts, there wasn't a lot of places to go. Disney wasn't hiring. They were in that phase. And so a lot of people were going to Don Bluth. Mm-hmm. And nobody was like having super duper fun there. and
that was probably around the time of what were they working on? Probably around that time. It wasn't like Troll and Central Park time. It was maybe before that.
Before that.
Yeah.
They were doing video games, I think. They were doing like
Dragon's
Lair, Space Ace.
Yeah. And I was my summers, I was there was a local amusement park called Elitch's. And if you live in Denver, it's great seasonal work, because if you get hired there and say, well, I'm going to be going back to college, they're cool with that because they shut down in the winter. So I was working there. I'd worked there multiple summers. And
wait, are you a caricature artist at this point?
No, I just worked. That's the thing. I actually got a call from, I think, Gary Goldman at Don Bluth. And he called me at home, and they were offering me a job. And I said, oh, I would love to, like, after I finish school. And he said, well, we need you right now. And I said, well, I'm working right now. I can't really come in. They said, well, what studio are you working at? And I said, oh no, I'm working at an amusement park. And then they said, so you're doing caricatures? And I'm like, no, I'm just like making hamburgers and stuff. And it was just paused. And he goes, well, come work for us. And I'm like, no, I want that summer. I want this is like, I knew it was going to be like my last summer.
Yeah.
This is a great example, this story alone, of how, not only a rebel, but such a different personality Chris Sanders is, because most people would be like, wait, you're going to pay me to draw. And you probably would have gotten like twice as much money than flipping burgers at the theme park. and been working on a feature film or video game that is now, famous or whatever.
And by the way, there's a movie out now. I wish I could remember the name, but this sounds exactly like it. It's about a small theme park, and I think Kristen Stewart was in it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think I do.
Maybe Jesse Eisenberg.
I thought you were going to say The Call of the Wild.
Adventureland?
Adventureland.
Yeah, I was thinking Tomorrowland, which I knew that's another movie.
Yeah.
Not as good.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm going to go back to CalArts. That's already a great story. Thank you, Chris. But I remember, so Tony and I saw some of your first animation, at least to us. I don't know if it was your first, but it was something called, and it was your CalArts film, Electric Alligator or something.
Oh, I called it Electric Breakfast.
Electric Breakfast.
Yeah.
But it had an alligator or a crocodile in it, right?
No, it had a fox. Wasn't it a fox?
No.
Yeah, it was a fox and like a little cat. It was a fox and a cat.
Electric Breakfast.
And it had like, tell us a little bit about how that came up, because it became one of those films that I had heard that. Here's the rumor. Okay. And so I really want to hear the real story. Is that you had kind of not started the thing, didn't know what you were going to do for a long time for your film, your CalArts film, probably helping a lot of your friends brainstorming on their ideas and films. And then kind of in the last minute, you just did this really off the wall, silly idea about making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
You did it in like a week or something like that.
I did it really fast. What really happened was that Gary Conrad and Leon Jusen were two of my friends there, and I was like my roommate was Gary Conrad. Gary pitched the idea that instead of making individual films, we would all three get together for our student film, and we would work together. And that's what we did. So we made this film. And
I'm going to jump in. Toby. Was his film Toby?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
A badly in between boy.
Animated boy. Yeah, he was badly animated. And
I've seen it.
Gary really wrote it. I mean, he just wrote it down and he wrote it and directed it, and Leon and I worked on it. And so that was the bulk of our time was spent doing that. And
group project.
When we finished it, I thought, there's like a couple of weeks left. Can I still make one more movie just for myself? And so that's where Electric Breakfast came in. And I thought, it's just going to be a cat and a fox, and the fox is worried about marshmallows and he wants to put them to death. And no, that was the previous year. This was the alligator. This was just that alligator. Oh my God.
It was an alligator, Tony.
It was an alligator.
Okay. I was right.
He was just running across a landscape. I'm sorry. And then he stops at the top of a hill and he sees
he sneaks up on a piece of bread, right?
Yeah. He runs down and he picks up the bread and he picks up the butter and he looks at them and then he spreads the butter on his face, and that's the end.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about it is
huge laugh. It was huge laugh.
It was just stupid. And I never cracked the code of doing a walk cycle. And so when in Toby, they needed a character that didn't know how to walk because he sat in they were all in like badly animated prison. It was like an institution.
Like the Lost Kids, Misfits. Yeah.
Yeah, like Charlie Brown was there with them, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it was, yeah. There's all these other guys. And so my character like sat around studying like Preston Blair walk cycles. And then when it came time for him to actually like walk at the end of the film, he was supposed to walk very awkwardly. That's the best walk I ever animated. And it looked wrong because I can't do it. Yeah. So in Electric Breakfast, any shot with the alligator running, it was just his head like this. So I never had to bother with the feet.
Yeah, I remember these sort of Maurice Noble type layouts. It's amazing how much we know about this film that are like hills and stuff, and you just see him like kind of come up around, or you just see his head go around it or something. I remember you having really creative shots.
Well, when we were coming in, when Tom and I were, just a freshman coming into CalArts, that's the thing. That was the popular thing to do, was you'd go to the library and there would be all these reels, because it was even before VHS. And there would be like the reels of all the student films from the year before that, all the way. And so we would just spend all day, Saturday, Sunday, going back and watching all the students that went before us, these famous people. And they're like, oh, this is Brad Bird's first film. And he was off already doing wonderful things at Disney or somewhere else. Lasseter, we looked at his first film. And then there's Joe
Chris
Ram.
Sanders one was always on the list.
Chris Sanders. that
Now,
Electric
was that the
Breakfast.
only those two films, Toby, the badly animated boy, and your Electric Breakfast? Were those the only two you made at CalArts? Because those are the ones I remember.
Yeah, I made one every year.
Oh.
And so technically, I had 4, and and I contributed to Toby, so that was like my 4th, and then the 5th one was Electric Breakfast. The prior year was the one with the fox and
the bunny.
cat, and that was
Oh.
can't remember what that was called. I'll have to remember. Anyway,
That was your
yeah,
magnus
so
opus, right?
I remember, like, do you remember? You guys remember that was back when they had the Oxberry,
Yes.
Titanic camera that was down in that like weird basement thing.
Scary. And you could only get on it like at midnight or past midnight. It was only like late in the evening that it was ever available, it seemed like.
Yeah, you had to sign up for it, and it was 16mm film and all this. And I remember that, like, I used to go down into that, and it didn't matter what the temperature was outside. In that room, it always got swelteringly hot.
I remember that.
Yeah, movie lights that were always on.
Yeah.
And I remember that, like, I had this like epiphany that instead of fighting with that camera, I would learn to work with it. So like whenever I would, like the last 2 years, I would bring like a little cooler with like soda pop like on ice, and I would wear shorts and a tank top. I would dress like it was summer because I knew it was going to be warm down there. And I even, like, this fingernail, I started growing it longer, because this fingernail here is the one that I would use to scoop the paper up. Because when the platen went down, and it went back up, you couldn't get the paper back up. And I remember just thinking, how much time am I wasting trying to like get that piece of paper up? So, so I had this one long fingernail that I would use to pick up that piece of paper.
To scoop. Yeah.
And it changed my experience down there. I began to like really look forward to the Oxberry because it was this sort of peaceful time.
It is kind of quiet time.
It is. Yeah.
So for those listening, just to give you a little background, so the big Oxberry camera was not quite the multi-plane camera that you would see sometimes in pictures, kind of a smaller but still huge platinum on the bottom, and the camera would be like well above here, like pretty high up, so that you could track it down.
You can crank it down, but you're using like levers and stuff.
And there's always like little levers on the front of the table.
And there was math involved and
big
stuff.
Lights. Yeah. And it was in this, I remember it being in this room, had no windows. So it looked like a dark room, basically.
Yeah.
And all cement. And I don't know what all happened in that room at times, but you would go in there and you'd have to fill out a sheet. This is the time that I need to use the Oxberry camera to shoot my film. And you just try and get through as many shots as you can of like putting a background down, then putting one piece of paper down, backlighting it.
And as platinum would come down, a piece of glass would like push it down, all the pieces down together.
And then you're steam ironing.
And then you always have to remember to take a frame. You know, there was those times where you're like, wait, did I take a frame? I can't. Oh, shoot.
And there was a button, and when it went, it was like, bam. It was like really loud bang.
Yeah.
It was like it was like, oh my gosh.
That's right. And then that's what kept you awake.
Yes, and you could put the camera into reverse.
Yeah.
And there were those times, and it was always like a legend. It never happened to me, but they would come in and say, okay, so and so was shooting a dissolve, so they put the camera into reverse. They forgot to put it back into forward, and they just backed up and double exposed like 1,300 feet of film or something.
Yeah.
And everybody who thought they were finished had to go back and reshoot their stuff.
Oh, right, because it would be all the same reel of film. That's right. I forgot about that part.
Yeah.
That we're all shooting on top of. And so that's so funny. Okay.
It's so archaic now.
It's
to
so
even
archaic.
think about that. All right, let's move into, you get into Disney, and you've shown up now as a storyboard artist, I assume. Did you start as a trainee?
You know, I got into Disney. Leon was working there, the same Leon, and he came. We were all living in an apartment at that point. We were, again, roommates in this apartment. Leon came back and he said, Disney has an opening, because they weren't hiring, but there was this one opening, and it was for the development department. And I was like, what's the development department? And he's like, well, they don't have one. They're just trying to start one. So I put a portfolio together. I worked really hard, and I put a portfolio together that I thought would be like a development department friendly portfolio. And I got hired. And I found out later that it was between me and somebody else, and I was the cheaper option. So I
love that.
in the development department, and for like months, and I was just, and I think I actually got an ulcer. I was like, I wanted to be there so badly. and I was so frightened that I wasn't doing my job right. But it was a little bit like nobody in that department knew exactly what a development department did. So we were all kind of stumbling around, and they would come up with an idea, and I would do some drawings, and then they'd say, okay, forget about that. Let's do something else. And they were working on Rescuers Down Under. And they asked me to do some sketches for the opening of the film. Just for like, because of the opening of the film, this little mouse in Australia needs to send a distress signal to New York. So I went to the research library, and I was sitting in front of the globe. The globe had a little dial, time dial on the top that would tell you the time zones. Because I just wondered, well, if they sent a message in the afternoon in Australia, would it be even like night or day in New York? And when I was looking at this globe,
that's smart to research.
I couldn't help but notice there were all these little islands between, Australia and New York. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if rather than just dialing them up, they had to bounce that radio signal from place to place to place, and eventually it gets to New York. So I did these drawings, including like this like wrecked World War II fighter airplane.
Yes.
In a jungle. Yeah.
Yeah, in the jungle, and this little mouse was keeping the radio running and stuff. And the producer for Rescuers Down Under came to me and he said, hey, would you storyboard that sequence? And the only thing I knew about boarding was from what I'd seen at Marvel Productions, and it wasn't something I thought I could do. And I said,
Muppet Babies. You were working on Muppet Babies, right? Before that?
Exactly. And I said, I can't do that. I don't know how to board. And he goes, okay. And he came back and he said, well, if you don't want to board it, can you just do all the other drawings that would come in between the ones you already did? And I said, well, I can do that.
It's like he tricked you.
So I worked really hard and I did all the drawings. And then after I had this whole pile of drawings, he came to me and said, he said, this is great. Can you hang them on a storyboard and like take a stick and show them to everybody? And I said, okay, I can do that. And so I got some music and I put it to music and I pitched the whole thing. And he goes, so this is great. Can you do this same thing to another part of the movie? And I said, yeah, I can do that. And so I was like 3 sequences in before I realized, I'm storyboarding. So they kind of tricked me into doing it.
I mean, like he knew that's what he was doing, right? Like he knew enough about the film process, I assume.
Well, yeah, and for the audience listening, I remember seeing those storyboards because Tom and I were, I think we were just coming into an internship at that same time that you were in development, and Joe Ramft and just, a great group of great creatives were working on. I think Brenda was on it, Brenda Chapman maybe, on Rescuers at that time. Anyway, great group doing. Yeah. Oh man. And just legends, all of them now. But I remember seeing an early screening with your storyboards in there. And I didn't know that. I didn't know what you just told us, which is that you came up with that whole concept in there, because I know people love that right when they saw it.
It was
beautiful.
One of the and by the way, I think it was in the trailer and stuff like that. It was one of the best parts of the movie. And you
really
did
was.
it like
It was
one of the very first things
fun.
that was done, right? It helped define kind of what they were doing there.
I really enjoyed it. I remember the piece of music I found was John Williams. It was like John Williams composed music for the Olympics a couple times, and it was one of those Olympic fanfares. But it had this great sort of like noble, hopeful, like feel.
Yeah,
and that was really the beginning, because like there were multiple times that I would board a sequence to a piece of music. And it just became such a help for me to do that. And then, and that was
Tom, I want to share screen if you don't mind, but it's worth pointing out, since you said that you worked at Marvel, there was a rumor that this is you. I don't know if you could see this picture, if it's big enough.
Yes.
That is you in the Spider-Man suit in this famous picture of Stan Lee. Stan Lee looking down Spider-Man. Is that true? Is that really you in the mask?
It is. I was working at Marvel, and Stan Lee had an office upstairs, and you knew he was there because his Rolls Royce would be parked out in front of the building, and or some other nice car. And one day they came in and they said, "Hey, Chris," and they had a Spider-Man suit, but it was only like about a foot high because it was all just stretchy. And they said, "Would you wear this Spider-Man suit? Because we want to do a little photo shoot with Stan Lee." I said, "No, I'm not gonna put that thing on." And they said, "We'll give you $20." And I was like, "Okay."
$20.
I put the thing on, and we went out front, and there was a photographer, and Stan Lee and I did multiple poses with his Rolls Royce and me and him. And at the
He
very,
wouldn't let
very
you on the
end,
hood of it, though, I'm assuming.
I don't think I sat on it, but I would put my leg up on the running board and
Yeah.
stuff. And at the very end, he's like, okay, we're all done. And then the photographer said, hey, just give me one more shot. Why don't you guys like stare at each other nose to nose like you're really angry? And so we did that nose to nose shot, and that was the picture that they used for, I don't know what they were going to use it for, but then I would go to comic stores, and there was a period of time you could not go to a comic store without seeing that black and white print.
Yeah, it became a
signed by Stan
poster
Lee.
in people's like kids growing up, their childhood room and all that, right? It was printed a lot. It became like this famous iconic. Yeah.
But
What a
I've
great
seen some of
story.
it. You were
I
a
saw
skinny
show
guy.
about what?
You were a skinny guy. I've seen other pictures from that photo shoot. They're out there, and you're just a skinny little guy, aren't you?
I don't think I was a good Spider-Man. It was a very
Well,
stunning.
but what it
It's a
also
very
says,
stunning
you had the best physique within Marvel at that time, I'm guessing.
Out of
'cause
all
that's
the
how
animators working at Marvel,
That's how they
you
picked
were the
you.
one that fit the suit.
I think that was pretty much it. They're like, this, you might be the only person that can actually wear this, so we'll give you $20. And
Okay, so thank you, Tony. That was a great additional story, and within that timeline, right around, this was just before you went to Disney. Okay, but now we're up to a timeline that with a bigger story that I really want the world to hear. And I don't think tell me if you've told much stories about your book that you created, the Big Bear Aircraft Company. Have you told this story very often?
I don't think I've ever really talked about it.
Tom's looking for an exclusive. Just tell him that
It's exclusive.
We have
now.
an exclusive
Okay,
now.
we have an exclusive. So, okay. So again, Tony and I think are now at Disney, and we're probably working on, I'm going to say, Beauty and the Beast. And you can let me know at what time this was and kind of what film was happening. But, and Tony, I think I'm hearing an echo. So you need to turn off your YouTube or whatever you got going.
No, I'm just on StreamYard. It's not
Oh,
me.
okay. Okay, good. So anyway, the rumor that we heard, and this happened at a retreat, and I'm gonna get everything wrong, so I'm gonna give you a minor little setup, and you can correct this. But was that you and a few other artists in the story department were a little bit, and we'll say disgruntled. I don't know if that's too strong of a word, but kind of having problems with how you're communicating with this new management that was coming in.
Right.
And
a lot of theater people,
right, a lot of theater people were
producers.
coming in. And it felt like that on the animation side. Tony and I were animators, not story people. And it felt like we had new production people on every production, right about Rescuers Down Under, Beauty and the Beast, around that time, where we were like teaching them what the animation process is. And it was just kind of like, can't you just, and then they would want to reinvent the wheel every film and stuff like that. So this is the setup, is that there was a story retreat from what I remember. And you, after talking to some friends, kind of got an idea to do a children's book. So can you take it from there?
Yeah, they had these retreats every once in a while. And I was not invited on the retreat, but one of the things they told everybody was that if you aren't invited on the retreat, but you have some feelings about it, you can write down some stuff and we'll put it in a book and we'll compile it, and everybody at the retreat will get the book. And I thought about it because I was feeling very strongly that like innovation was lacking. Like I felt like we were kind of doing the same thing again and again. There was a lot of repetition, and I felt like we could be a little bolder. Anyway, the real thing is, I thought, if I write something, is anybody going to really read that? And then I came up with the idea: what if I did like a little children's book with that was predominantly drawings? It would be drawing dominant with a minimum of text.
Yeah.
And that's probably my best chance to have somebody actually read it. And I think it really worked out because I did this book called The Big Bear Aircraft Company. It's about a bear who owns an airplane manufacturing company, and these little animals on the production line want to build jets, and he's like, no, propeller driven is fine. We've always been good with that. It's always worked, and it always will. And so eventually they're testing this airplane, and the bear is riding around in it, and like a jet shows up, and shoots them down.
Oh man.
Past them, and that forces him to rethink: are they innovating enough? And so then he decides, okay, maybe we need to build a jet too. So it was all about just like persuading people to be a little bit more innovative and
like Walt, right? Don't be a follower, be ahead of the crowd, think outside of the box, right?
Yeah, and it definitely. I mean, it was.
Can you share screen, Tom?
It was hard to imagine anybody else making films that would really compete with Disney. And that was the thing that I was proposing, is that, well, someday somebody may come along that could dominate Disney, and we should be trying hard to stay current.
Yeah.
Trying hard to stay
relevant. It is out there. Tony's starting to show some images for our podcast
there it is,
people. Yeah.
Here's my magnificent lettering.
Just click on one of the drawings. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, sorry, continue. Oh yeah, this must be after getting shot down. Yeah.
But you know,
so total genius. Oh, there's the Lilo and Stitch rocket, by the way. Yeah.
What, this one?
Didn't this become part of Lilo and Stitch, Chris?
It does look a bit the same, doesn't it?
I don't know.
Like, I can't really.
Okay, so back to your story. So, and my understanding was that it was a bunch of the leadership that were at this retreat, right? They had artistic leadership, but also, I'm guessing, the president of animation and that kind of leadership too, the high ups.
Yeah, and I heard back that it was when you saw the book that it had been included in, you could really understand why. I don't think people would necessarily sit down and read, because it was like a telephone book. It was huge. And some people wrote a lot. And it would be very difficult to really sit down and go through this entire thing. But as you were flipping through it, you'd come to this little thing that had a bunch of drawings. You would definitely, I think, be more likely to read that.
Oh, so it was included in that big book then, huh?
Yeah.
Everybody's comments.
Now here's the rumor that I heard about that, is that the executives at the retreat didn't get it. They thought it was cute, adorable. They complimented you on it, but they didn't understand that it was about them.
I think that would be probably accurate. I mean, who's going to read that and go, you know what? That Chris Sanders, I'm going to change my ways. We're going to try something very innovative. But it was really nice to just, and I think the next time around I did get invited on the retreat, maybe because I had done that little book. Because
now I'm shocked. I would have thought you would not have been invited because you did that little book.
Just like your example of Rescuers Down Under and how you were innovative way back when you first started at Disney. I want to reminisce a little bit about Beauty and the Beast, because I remember, and I've taught a storyboard class actually for my students at Azusa Pacific University, and I use some of your images and storyboards from Beauty and the Beast. Particularly, you were given the cherry sweet, wonderful sequence where Belle is trying to revive Beast, right? He's the rosebud the rose petals have fallen and he's dying, and she has that very intimate moment, poignant moment, and says she loves him, and then the magic starts. You did all of that sequence, which is like so key and pivotal in the movie. You're still fairly young, fairly new. You're getting some really sweet stuff that's casting wise coming your way. How did that come about, and what was your feelings at the time doing that?
I was so thrilled to get that sequence, and I wanted to do my best on it. I remember that Brenda Chapman and I actually, there's a lot of times you just end up, at the studio after hours, just working. And we would talk during the day, and we would talk, like, she would stay late as well. Bunches of us did. And so, story never really stops. You go home, you keep thinking about it. And she and I had discussed the rose bit. And according to the rules of the curse, as long as somebody pronounced their love before the last petal fell, the curse would be broken. But that didn't mean, there was no timeline on that. So the idea that I think we came up with together was like, well, what if we go ahead, let that petal fall, but nothing happens, and let it and let the audience feel, maybe for a moment,
that he's gone.
It didn't work. That it was too late. Because we really wanted to extend that and get as much as we could out of that moment. And again, I found a piece of music to match that to. And I've been actually, the funny thing is lately I've been trying to find that piece of music again. It was on a cassette tape, and I think I can eventually dig it up. It was like the perfect accompaniment. And I remember the first time I pitched it was to Don Hahn, and he was walking around after hours. And I said, oh, I think I'm almost done with this. And I pitched it to him. And the other part of it that I was really interested in was that when she comes back to him, when Belle comes back, that the Beast would be happy, that he wouldn't be. I didn't want to play it like I sort of felt like it would be expected, which would be that he was sad and like I'm leaving you. I didn't want that. I wanted to be the opposite. I wanted him to look at her, put his hand on her face, and just say, "You came back." And
you came back. I still really remember Robbie Benson saying that. Yeah,
and I was really proud of it. And I pitched it. I put the music on. I pitched it to Don, and I could tell that he was into it. He really liked it, and he said he was very complimentary, and then we rolled forward with it, and Jeffrey, when he first saw it, he felt we waited too long because the pedal fell and it waited a beat. And I remember that we were sitting in the theater, and he goes, no, the pedal fell. You know, she says I love you, and boom, 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 he transforms, and we're like,
bing, bang, boom, come on.
Let it go.
Let's get it going, guys. Come on.
Quicker, faster, cheaper.
Let it lay there for a minute. Let it rest. And then the funny thing was that after we screened it in a test screening, it got a really good response from the audience. And then Jeffrey went the opposite way, and he's like, no, like leave him there for a bit. And then he's like, now. And then he was like, let him go for a longer, leave him there for longer. And like, he's like, and now it felt like he was getting kind of cold. Like, it's like, I think we're leaving him there too long before.
Yeah. Cold. Now,
his lips are turning blue.
The funny thing is, this is also a really good example of you need to have some scratch music in there that is just powerful, because that leaving it lingering, if you didn't have music behind it, that's where the music really does the heavy lifting in a really emotional moment where you're just, not a lot's happening.
Oh, and I will say the best storyboard artists always know soundtracks really well. So you're proof of that. Soundtracks have always been something that you listen to constantly, right? That you have in your head while you're working.
I love doing it. I don't really board anything without music, no matter what.
Yeah. Okay, what's the soundtrack of your life? This is one of those weird questions. What's the soundtrack of Chris Sanders' life?
Oh, like if I was gonna. I'd have to think about that.
Well, when we do Chris Sanders the musical, like we want to tap into these songs, right?
I know you have a favorite though. It'll come up later, I'm sure. All right, so that was I've always wanted to hear that story. So thank you about Beauty and the Beast. Now, it wasn't too long after that you went on to. Were you on Aladdin? You skipped Aladdin.
I went on to Aladdin for a little bit, and then the funny thing is I went to Aladdin for just a few months, and then I got called back to Beauty and the Beast, and that's when I did that sequence. So I actually bounced forward, and I worked on I only worked on one sequence, and it was a bit where Aladdin goes to peek. He wants to get a peek at Jasmine, or he just wants to look over the wall of this palace, and he ends up like whispering some things to her. But the description in the script was that the palace wall was incredibly tall, but then there was this bit where he was whispering to her. So like I was like, how am I going to do that? And I don't get super caught up in like the details sometimes. Like I try not to. But in this one case, I thought, how in the world am I going to? He can't be up on a 200-foot wall.
And then she's on the ground. Yeah.
So I thought, well, maybe there's a tree, and he crawls down in the tree, and he kind of makes his way down, so he's still hidden. So that was I worked real hard.
And they cut that in the movie?
No, they cut that, right?
Oh,
I don't think it was in. Yeah, I don't think it ever ended
it's
up.
probably now. Is it that segment where he's on the carpet and he's talking to her on the balcony, and the carpet kind of pushes him up?
Yeah, they probably rewrote it for that, maybe.
I think it did, because I remember that when I pitched it, Ron and John didn't say a lot. Whatever it was not working, and they didn't really say a lot. And they were like, well. And they kept doing that.
I can see Ron doing that. John seems like he would have a lot to say, but Ron.
That may be why I got sent back to Beauty and the Beast.
Now, when you let me jump back to that Beauty and the Beast moment, because I do remember that sequence, and you're kind of proving that in your timetable came about fairly late in the making of Beauty and the Beast. That whole how she the rose petal dying off and almost losing Beast and her professing her love. That came about story-wise fairly late. They were making constant changes on the story as these things happen. So you came back onto it. But I've also heard Glenn Keane talk about animating that sequence because he knew I want to animate Beast and all of that. And so did Mark Ken. He did most of Belle. But he's talked about how there was a lot of pressure on him because at that point it was very late in the production. They were like, we need this whole sequence done in like a month.
Those were the last shots he did in that film because that ending was thrown in at the very last minute.
And they put an incredible amount of pressure on him to have it done like in a month. And he's like, guys, and this is the power of Glenn Keane, right? He's like, guys, no, I need some time on this. I need you to back off and give me, this is really important.
And he said we've had him on our podcast. He said he'd been waiting for this sequence, just like you were saying.
He was waiting for Chris Sanders.
And so when he saw what you did, now, so I don't know if this is where you're going, Tony, but I'd love to hear, what did you think when you saw, because he took it even further, but the actual transformation part, not so much the love scene and him dying and all that, but really the transformation. That wasn't quite in the boards, right? That was
no.
He added quite a bit.
The thing that I put in the boards was I had this. It was raining and drizzling, and then I thought, what if that drizzle begins to turn kind of magical, and the little raindrops begin to like almost
sparkle
glow and spark and things like that. But that's the thing that I love talking about when it comes to animation, because it's such a collaborative thing, and everyone who devotes them, like I remember just every time I sat in the theater and I had worked on a film and we were at the premiere and that logo would come up, that Disney logo. And I felt so incredibly proud, but I also had this feeling like I wish I'd worked a little harder. Like, because the thing about these films, and you guys, I'm sure have talked about this so many times, they are the way they are because of the particular people that worked on them.
Yes.
If you changed out one person, then that film would be different. And that's such a great example of that, because I worked so hard to try to get the sequence to be the best I could think it could possibly be. And I just made it as good as I could. But then here comes Glenn Keane, and wherever I left it, he picked it up and he carried it forward.
Yeah.
And then he went like further with it. So it was a thrill to see that transformation. And you just hope, you want to get it as
that
far
was
as
called
you can.
plussing back in the old days of Walt Disney Animation.
We used to call that plussing. Yeah.
Plussing was the concept that whatever came onto your desk, it was your responsibility as an artist to send it forward, to make it better than it came on your desk, to plus it in some way, to be additive to that process. And that's a great example.
That would have been hard to get a Chris Sanders sequence like that and make it even better. So, hey, so we're going to get to Milan in a second, but let's jump to Lion King. Okay, so Lion King, you took on a new hat. You wore a new hat, and I think this is the hat that actually set you up to become a director eventually, right? Because you took on a whole sequence, the Can't Wait to Be King sequence. I guess we can't say you directed it.
Directed it.
But you art directed it, and it felt like you were so involved story-wise, designed all the characters. The look is actually very Chris Sanders-ish, very early.
Oh, it became your sequence.
Yeah,
for sure.
So tell us about just in general, what were you doing in Lion King before that? Because I don't remember a lot and was that the only bit you did? I don't think it is. I know you did more.
Story. Remember, you started in story, so maybe you could take it from there.
The thing is, I started on that as a production designer. And this is a really good thing to talk about, because it was a bit of a failure of mine, and this is one of those things that like everybody, like, it's not what you I think do when things are working out. I think it's what you do when things are not working out that may be the most important thing that you have to face, because Roger had approached me about being a production designer on the movie, or art director actually. And I said, no, I'm not really an art director. I don't know what to do. I had no idea what the job would entail. But he was persistent, and I eventually said, okay, I'll be an art director. And I was co-art directing with Lisa Keane. And we went to Africa. The greatest thing in the world was to go to Africa for those 2 weeks. And that was a whole thing, which was amazing. But when I came back, I didn't really know what to do. And I tried and I tried and I tried. And one of the things that I think wasted a lot of time on was
Mhm.
trying to figure out, because I talked to the layout department a lot, and they were like, well, what's the style? What's the style? Somebody needs to set the style. And I had no idea, like, what, and I kept trying to like impose a style upon this film, which was just a waste of time. It was the wrong thing to do.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
remember that, and Don Hahn, the producer, who was such a nice guy. I remember I was sitting in my office, just lost as to what to do, as usual. And he came in and he had a talk with me, and he said, "What would you think if we made you production designer and somebody else does art direction?" And I was like, "That would be great. I would like that
Really?
because I
You
knew
really
I
helped
was
him out. He was
Yeah.
probably
messing it
sweating.
up. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just messing it up, and he was being so nice and so gracious. And the funny thing is, then there were two things that happened. Andy Gaskell came in,
Yeah.
and he
Yeah.
did a brilliant job. He was a powerhouse. He immediately, I just felt like he didn't stress about what the style was. He just jumped in and said, Africa, he never said this, but from his drawings, I think he just accepted Africa is enough. Just make it look like Africa, and we're going to be great.
Yeah.
And so he just jumped in and he started
Mhm.
storyboarding. He storyboarded the opening of the film in like
Yes.
2 days. Like he sat down, he did it, and it never changed. I swear.
And shot
It
by
was
shot.
there.
Yeah, shot for shot. It just
Oh,
stayed
God.
exactly his drawings. They were amazing.
So good.
I
Yeah.
remember that.
And I learned so every stop in my journey at Disney, I learned something. And I learned so much just by watching Andy Gaskell, who
Mhm.
never said no to anything. He just went forward, and he was additive, and he was so kind and so nice, and he was always such a calming presence
Yeah.
in the room. And
Uh-huh.
he filled you with confidence. He was
Mm.
amazing. And so I became production designer. And because I became production designer, I think they may have been trying to find things for me to do. I think they may have been like, if we make him production designer and don't completely just throw him out, then he maybe will feel better. I think that's the feeling I
Yeah.
got with you just being. But the funny thing was that allowed me. They said, we have the sequence called "I Can't Wait to Be King," and up to a third of the film is going to be done in the Florida studio. Would you be willing to go there and work on it there? And I was like, yeah. So they flew me to Florida. I stayed at the Yacht Club Resort. It was my first time there.
Beautiful.
And I got to know the Florida crew, and they were eye-opening. The Rick Sluter and Bob Stanton and the whole painting department, their background department, they were so young, they were so talented, and they were so motivated. These
Yeah.
guys would paint all week long. And then when the
Yeah.
weekend came, they would gather up their brushes and their easels, and they would go out and they would paint. They just like couldn't stop learning. They were hungry, and they were curious, and they were energetic. And the best story about that was, not only did I get to know the Florida crew, and I realized how talented they all really were, but Rick Sluter, there was a children's book that I thought, oh, this children's book might be a great style for I Can't Wait to Be King, but I couldn't figure out
Hmm.
how to do it. I kept staring at this book, and I had showed it to some of the background artists in California, and they were like, well, we can do a gouache version of this, and I think somebody even did one, and I was
Yeah.
sitting with it, and this doesn't look like the book. And then as I was sitting there in despair in my room, staring at the artwork that they had done and then this children's book, Rick Sluter walked by, and he's like, what's going on? And I was like, oh, I want to make this children's book look thing, but I don't know how. Nobody knows how it's done. And he's like, can I look at it? And he picked up the book, and he goes, oh yeah. He goes, this is a sepia undertone wash, and you can even see a little bit of the pencil here. And then they did a heavier treatment with some, do you want me to do this? Because I think I could do this. And I was like, yeah, okay. And he went away, and he came back like the next day, and he had perfectly reproduced the look that was in that. And that was like, oh my gosh, we can maybe do this. So then on one of my trips to Florida, I spent a huge amount of time in the fishbowl.
on
right
tour.
And I just took all these different beats, and I would make these little color keys.
Mhm.
And so I really felt that I was finally fulfilling the whole thing I was supposed to do when they made me production designer. In a way, I did art direct that particular sequence and a few other things by keeping myself where I belonged, which was story.
Yeah.
I stayed more in the story realm, and I stayed there, and so I was boarding, but I was also doing color keys within the boards, which is what I also did when it came to the ghost sequence with with Mufasa's ghost. So I did end up doing some art direction by being a production designer, but on those particular sequences.
But you also, speaking
Great
of
story.
Mufasa's ghosts, didn't you do a lot of the storyboarding work too in that section?
Mm-hmm.
So you
Yeah,
storyboarded it first, and then did color keys and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I tried to make the look a part of it.
Mm,
So I slid back into a place where I felt confident and comfortable, which is boarding, and I really never stopped doing that. I think I learned several lessons there, um, and so my failure as an art director did not end up completely defeating me, and I went with it, went back to a place where I felt comfortable, but did end up, growing considerably, meeting all these other artists, getting to know the
Mm.
Florida studio. I think being successful in that realm, and then also again, no matter what I've done, I've always stayed more in story where I belong.
yeah, that's amazing.
So, and Tony, I'm not really watching the time very closely, but
I know I don't want to. I'm
so
enjoying
good.
this so much. We have talked about that. This may end up being a part one of a part two, part three, whatever. Chris Sanders' story, because I love digging in deep to these Disney years, but you have so much more to offer and talk about when it comes to your DreamWorks work, your live action work, and where you are now. But let's keep going if you don't mind in the direction of Mulan, because
Well, we might have to pin it on Milan and then just do some Q&A. So let's
okay,
let's
all
dive
right.
into that because, well, and if I can start this, Tony, because I know you're going to have a lot to say about Milan. Yeah, my question is I feel like that Lion King experience and you not quite directing that sequence, but having such a say in it, and really, you didn't even talk about it, but you designed every elephant and monkey and ostrich, all those supporting characters. You redesigned them in the Chris Sanders look and style. The one thing we didn't do, and I know that was probably thought about at one point, was we didn't change Simba. Like him and Nala didn't evolve into the Chris Sanders.
Stylistically,
Yeah, which would have been really cool, by the way. I kind of would have liked that personally. But and by the way, I did one shot in that sequence. I did everybody look left. That's it. That part.
you got to sing it,
left.
otherwise I
Yeah.
don't really. Everybody look
Look
left.
left.
Okay,
Yeah. Anyway.
Wait,
that
are
was
you talking
Tom.
about when the animals go through?
No, I'm just talking about Simba on the top of the head of the giraffe saying,
Okay.
everybody look left. It was that simple.
He said everybody look left and a bunch of animals run through, and then he said everybody look right and the animals run through the other direction.
The animals running through, I think, was Barry Temple. But yes,
Okay.
I did the fun part of that.
You did the Simba on the giraffe
on the giraffe's neck, yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, but my thought is obviously what you just said was, okay, I learned so much. I'm assuming that means you also got some extra confidence from that. You're like, okay, I'm starting to see how I work, how I can fit into a film in a bigger way, not just do the storyboarding, even though you said that's your safety spot. But I do have opinions, and you're starting to learn how to kind of adapt art direction and things like that. And so how does that lead into, I know that'll hopefully eventually lead into you even considering to be a director on Lilo and Stitch. So I don't want to jump into that quite yet, but how did that lead into you on Milan and your position there, and also being involved with Florida?
Well, the Florida thing was a revelation, because I think working in California, Florida was a mysterious place. You heard things about Florida. It was a great place. It wasn't such a great place. People had real opinions about it.
Yeah.
But I was one of the few people that had gone there. So when I came back, I was really singing its praises. I thought it was amazing. And the people there were incredible. And so I was doing my best to set people straight. I'm like, this is a great studio. Like, you got to really pay attention to this place. And
were you like telling people, like walking around, go, and there's another Tony there, but he's nice.
This is he didn't know me as well back then. So this is pre Mulan.
Okay. Keep going. Sorry.
No, I think that Lion King, I mean, it shook me up a little bit. Like when I'd never been taken off of something before. And so that was a bit of a jolt. But hold on.
That's Jeffrey Katzenberg. What are you talking about, Chris?
I heard that. But it was a bit of a jolt, and it would not be the first time that I would have to bounce back with something in this business. But I think that was, but coming back from it and finding some success was healing. And yeah, so that was the biggest thing I came out of it with, I think.
Wow. And then I know you started on Mulan before I did. I was kind of a second director brought on a little bit later. And we've never talked about this, but my guess is that they asked you to co-direct with Barry at some point.
Oh,
Did they? Did they?
That's a good question. I know that,
please say yes.
because of the Lion King thing, I turned down Mulan a couple of times.
I had heard
Because
that too.
I was leery about the story. I didn't know if it was a good match for me or if I was a good match for it. And so I was leery about it. And given the experience on Lion King, I said, I'll work on this for a while. They invited me to go to China. And I said, no, because if I go to China, I'm going to feel as though I'm obligated to stay on this film. And I want to be able to get off of it if I don't feel like it's going to work out. So I didn't go to China. But the funny thing is, I stayed on the film.
You should have gone to China. You're like kicking yourself now. I know.
It was
that's how we got Hans Bacher too, though. I remember he was a real temporary at first. It was like, well, Hans had finished on Beauty and the Beast and he'd done some work early on in Lion King. And, he was just kind of hitting all the projects a little bit. And I remember, Barry telling me later that, Hans came on at first just to try some things. But he got so much support and respect, which I don't think he felt before on some of the other productions that he had contributed to. And I know particularly Barry and stuff and Rick and all those guys were just like, oh my gosh, just blown away by Hans Bacher's. He did these little postcard size marker renderings of huge vista landscapes of China. And oh my gosh, his stuff was stunning. And I think, and I remember this happening when I first came on, and because I was in total agreement, we got to get this guy as the production designer. And I think it happened soon after I came on that we were like, please do this. Because I think Hans was not totally, he was like you, kind of like a little leery at first, but he fell in love. He fell in love with Mulan. He fell in love with the environment.
And was that your story, Chris? Was it the film you fell in love with, or Florida, or was it kind of the whole package?
I was a huge fan of the idea that Florida was going to do this film all on their own, because I thought it was they were certainly ready for it. I knew that. And so I had absolute confidence that Florida was going to be able to pull it off. I think it was just, I don't know what it was exactly. I was just very trepidatious about it, but I did really fall in love with the characters, and that film was the most difficult thing I think I've ever really worked on, because I remember it was 6 years from start to finish. So people who had children at the very beginning, they brought them to the premiere as 6-year-olds. It was a titanic undertaking, and it was a monumentally difficult film to make. But I still watch the film as an audience member because I'm really amazed by it. It's so strong. And I remember Hans, because I remember Hans, he was like a chemist with all of his markers. He'd go into his room and he had like 15, 20 different sets of markers.
And he was designing colors. He was mixing colors and
Yeah. And he was like a chemist. He knew like he could lay down one color, but this other pen, the chemicals in that would like cause it to resist. And he could like make clouds by dabbing on this other type of pen, and that ink would push the other ink out of the way because it was all still wet and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he always worked with the door closed.
And it was highly toxic.
Oh my God, you'd open the door and you're like, oh my God, it smelled explosive.
And like, how are you surviving this?
Oh my gosh.
We always joke that it was part of what made him the crazy guy that he was, that
it may not be a joke, Tony. I don't know.
It changed his brain chemistry.
Did you guys get along, Chris? I mean, because he was known to have a temper, and he was German.
He was volatile
that way. Yeah.
He was very passionate. I was very fortunate because I was never in a position where I had to say no or change anything.
Yeah.
So I could enjoy just walking down the hall and dropping in. And
you weren't above him or below him, right?
Yeah.
So that's you were out of trouble. Yeah.
Well, and I will say from my standpoint, Barry enjoyed a little different relationship with Hans. Hans and I developed a very close relationship towards the end of the production. I will say that. So a lot of respect. And I know he respected me towards the end of the production. But Barry was a painter. He was known to be like a painter himself, and so he fit in with Rick Sluter and all those guys, Bob Stanton, and Hans saw that about him too. So there was a certain a kinship that came from oil painting and all this kind of stuff. I was this 2D character animator guy and totally not that. And but I had real opinions about the look of and style of the film. And so at first Hans was like very suspicious of me, I think, and contentious. But I also love that about him because he was ultra passionate about what he did. And I love that about what you were on that film too. I'll say the same about you too, Chris, is that you were always ultra passionate about who Mulan was. And I can't say this enough, but I feel like I need to say this on this recording for history, is that Mulan would not be the character that she is, and that movie would not be the movie that it is without Chris Sanders being attached to it, and particularly being the head of story. And I'm proud to say that Chris Sanders is one of the very first story artists that ever got a script writing credit. And we push for that for Chris. And to this day, I think you're the only storyboard artist that has given like a script writing credit for the work that you did. But it's because you contributed at such a high level and you pulled together the best possible team. I can't say enough about our storyboard team too, under your direction, with Dean Dubois and Chris Williams and John Sanford. Yeah. And oh my gosh, the list goes on. We had more. We did a Mulan thing at CTN recently, a Mulan
a couple of years
reunion. And I think we said on that reunion that there was, I think, something like, I want to say 8 different storyboard artists or other artists that went on to direct at Disney. 8 directors came out of that movie, and that's phenomenal in itself. That just shows you that we had this like junior, young, creative, energetic, passionate group of artists that were just so eager to show what they could do. And I think, but you led that, Chris. You were the one that inspired that younger generation to rise up.
I remember how amazing it was to come into the studio, and as head of story, I spent the entire first part of the day just visiting with every one of the story artists. So I would drop in with Dean and say, "How's it going?" And Dean would say, "Oh, and this is such an embodiment of what you were saying earlier, that I always believed that a story artist, the scene should leave them better than when they got it." And that always happened. Everything always evolved. And I think that we did have we had a good atmosphere there. And everybody played nice in the sandbox. Everybody was very, very respectful, but people were completely passionate, and they communicated how they felt. And so I would visit, like, say, Dean, and he would say, "Okay, this is what I'm doing," and we would talk about his sequence, and he was changing things. So I would leave his office, go talk to Chris Williams, and say, "Hey, Chris, this is what Dean is doing." And he'd say, "Oh my gosh." Well, and then I would report to him what Dean was up to. And he would say, "Well, I'm going to do this." And we would talk about things, and I'd bounce back to Dean and say, "Well, Chris said this." So that would be my day for the most part until the afternoon, when I would get a chance to really draw.
Spraying. So
I became like the living, and then I would run in, then we would all get together, and I'd say, "Okay, this is what's going on." And then you would react, and I would go back to the story artists. So it was this thing where there was so much of it that was never scripted. Like, there was, like, I became like this living repository for where the story stood at that moment. And then the writers would come in, and we would talk to the writers, and eventually it would be memorialized in the boards or in the pages. But then by the time those, like, were even on film and in a story reel, it was changing again. So that was the experience, I think, on Mulan, is it, like, that was the most intensive story development I'd ever been on and involved in. And it was such you remember, it was such a living being. Like, we were just like it was like the ocean just changing.
It was constantly changing. And it was like, people would just throw out ideas, and what about this? And then, before you know it, it's being storyboarded and redrawn. And I remember Rita Shao, who's one of our script writers on that was very close with the story team. She was just typing away, trying to catch up to what you guys were coming up with, just like, stream of consciousness almost. And yet it was always driven by this love and passion for this character, a character that we hadn't seen at Disney before, the strong feminine heroine. And I just remember there was that, we never really vocalized it, but I think there was just this strong feeling of, we have a responsibility here to do something different. We have an opportunity to do something different, first of all, but a responsibility to present to a new audience a new strong female heroine. And Mulan really capsulized, I think, everything that we wanted to do at that moment, and probably should have done way before that moment, but it was happening. And I think we didn't know everything that would come from it. Obviously, nobody has that kind of insight, but there was that passion in the room, I think, of making her unique. I remember, let me just say this real quick, Tom, and I know we got to get to Q&A really quick here, because we were way past, and thank you for your time, Chris.
But keep talking, Tony.
So there was a moment in time when we were working on Mulan's Reflection song, and Chris was heavily involved with storyboarding that. I think there was several different board artists that took a pass at it and stuff. But I remember there was a scene where Mulan has to go over the bridge. She had a little Moongate bridge kind of thing. I forget what those are called now. And she had to get to the other side to go up the stairs to the family bays, and where she was ultimately going to see her reflection. And Chris was just like, this doesn't seem right. Every time, I remember you would pitch it and stuff, and you had tried her like going over, and then you had her like go over the railing. She was like stepping over the railing and kind of teetering, balancing herself as she walked across the railing. And then ultimately, I think you just had her splash through the little water, and I think that's where she saw Cricky for the first time, or another character that was like that. And I just remember that you were like, Mulan wouldn't just walk over a bridge like anybody else, any other girl. She would find a different way. She would never do what's normal or expected. And that resonated. That was such an early comment that you made about Mulan. And it resonated with me for the rest of the picture about how we need to think about Mulan. She would never walk into the room like anybody else. There would be something unique about how she did it. And you proved that out so many times.
Thank you, Tony.
I don't have a question.
Was that a question? Oh my god!
We have other questions we can get to.
Oh my
now.
god! Okay, Chris. But anyway, pat on the back for that. That was a really good point. Let's go to questions. And can you stay on for like 10 minutes? Because we're right at time. Because here's a good one. There's two people, I'm going to pop them up, that are asking. This one, Spinster Mimic, says, not an industry question, and I apologize, but can you still do the Stitch voice? Hold on. Now put a pin on that.
How many times have you been asked to do that?
And here's a related one too. Oh no, sorry. I picked the wrong one. Here it is. When did you know you had a flair with voices for voice acting? So the heart of this question is, how did you get the gig to be? Now, obviously, you're directing the film. I'm assuming you're doing the voices as you're pitching for the voice of Stitch. Did that just naturally evolve? And humbles Chris, that I know, you probably were fighting it. Like, oh, I don't. People were going, you should do the voice. Is my assumption. Is that how it all happened?
So I have to credit Dean for that, because whenever I'd pitch, I would always use that voice to annoy people, and I would call up, like, I'd call Kelly Asbury on the phone when we were on the main lot working on Beauty and the Beast. I'd call him up on the phone. I'd go, Kelly, what are you doing, Kelly? And so I would do that voice and stuff. So I would just assign that voice to Stitch when I pitched the boards. The original concept was that Stitch would never speak. He was never going to
pantomime.
Say a word. So that's where we embarked upon that as our goal. Later on, it became obvious they would have to say things now and then, but we were really concerned because we knew the studio well enough to know that should we hire someone, they would want to hire somebody like a known actor, and then we would be in trouble because we didn't want to end up in a situation where we were like directing somebody in a booth and saying, no, Mr. Redford, we just want you to go like we just
right.
And if we get somebody who's a prominent actor, we're going to be in this really weird place because they're going to be unhappy if they do what we want them to do, or the studio will say, can't they just talk more? And now suddenly Stitch is speaking too much and it would ruin the character. So Dean said, why don't you just do the voice, Chris? You do the voice and we'll see how it goes. So I started doing the voice, and it all seemed to work out until the very end of the movie. We realized he was going to have to say a bit. And he says that whole thing about, this is my family. they're little and they're broken, but they're still good. And that made me nervous because I was like, okay, I'm not an actor. I know where I belong, and it's not in a recording booth or recording these things. So that day, I thought we could lose this whole thing. So I said, okay, Dean, today I'll be an actor. I'm going to go in the booth, and you direct me, and I'll do whatever you tell me to do. I will do my very, very best. And if this doesn't work out, we'll figure out what to do next. We'll change gears. So,
Yeah.
So Dean directed me. He nuanced that whole little speech. I did my very, very best. We put it in the film, and it worked out. But it was interesting because whenever we got our audience comment cards at the end of a test screening, the lowest rated thing was consistently Stitch's voice.
You're kidding me.
It was always Stitch's voice. Yeah.
But by that point, Jeffrey Katzenberg was out of the studio, right? So there wasn't any big executive going, all right, let's can Chris. Let's get him out.
Now, just a sub question to that. Did they pitch shift it at all? Was it just pure you?
Yeah.
Okay.
No. I think nowadays they pitch shifted a bit because I think my voice has dropped a little bit. I had like a little change in my voice. So I think nowadays they pitch shifted up just a little bit. Just 2 weeks ago, I did a recording for a Christmas show, a Christmas parade at one of the parks.
Okay. And Stitch shows up. All right. Here's another question from Destin. What was your favorite film/project to work on? I guess this could be a book. It could be a webcomic, Kissaloo, right? It could be anything.
I'd have to say that they were all, this is such a cop-out answer, but it's true. They're all special for some reason or another. I always look back at Beauty and the Beast as being like the perfect project as far as the schedule, the crew. It had the greatest story crew. I learned so much. It was Ed Gombert. It was Joe Ranft, Joe Grant, Brenda Chapman, Kelly Asbury. Everybody on that story crew was so
Roger
good.
Allers. Roger Allers.
Oh my gosh, Roger Allers. And then Kirk and Gary, who were such great, gracious, intelligent, wonderful directors on that whole thing. And Don Hahn, the producer, who was so kind and patient and never panicked. Like even when things looked dark, he was just this calming presence. So that one I look upon as being like the greatest learning experience I ever had. But Mulan, I'm so desperately proud of that, and I loved the people that worked on it, and I loved being on it. Lilo and Stitch, because of the same things. Like that was a dream project because it was such a weird, quirky thing, and that's a whole other discussion that needs to be had.
Part 2.
Yeah, and then Lion King, the same thing for what for the disaster that befell me, but I came out of it, and what I learned on that, and again working with Roger and Brenda, and it was just and Don again. That was such a tough thing to make, but man.
Lightning round. Velociraptor Blue. What is your favorite dragon and How to Train Your Dragon?
Toothless. Surely.
Oh, there it is.
Of course.
Oh yeah.
This is almost yes or no. Landon Kemp says at Pencilish Studios. Were you involved with the Lilo and Stitch prequel comics for Disney Adventures magazine?
I never was involved in any of the other things. I thought it best if I just let them be what they were going to be.
But they hired you for voice work, obviously.
I would always do the voice. I did the voice for the sequels, and I still do the voice for the video games, parades, things like that, toys.
This is almost nonsensical, but we're going to do it. Adam Craig, there's a picture of a character reflected in the monitor behind Chris Sanders. Who is that?
Reflected in the monitor?
Oh, that's reflecting from my My Hero Academia calendar.
Oh, he likes anime. Everybody heard it here first.
I do. Big fan. And the calendar is on the wrong month because I like that drawing a lot.
And some people think you're drawing while we've been talking. You haven't been drawing anything in particular, have you, on your Cintiq?
I have my Cintiq thing, but I have not been.
Okay. Very cool.
Let's end with this one, if you don't mind. This is one you get a lot, I'm sure we all do, but it's always good to hear a fresh answer. Senny asked, tips for beginners practicing to go anywhere in the industry, things to focus on, things to learn, things to watch out for, etc. Anything?
I'm such a fan of story. A lot of people, I would say this, a lot of times people approach me at Comic-Con and in other places, and they almost all want to go into character design. and development. And you have to be, first of all, you have to be amazing to do that kind of stuff. Like I'll cite Claire Hummel as somebody who draws so beautifully and so amazing. I'm so I am in awe of her talent.
We all are.
Me too.
Paul Felix as
Felix.
well. Paul Felix, who can do anything. He is stunningly talented. You have to be in that realm, I think, to secure a job in development and really pull it off. So I always tell people, like, focus on story if you can. Story is where everything comes back to and emanates from, no matter what. Lighting, camera work, dialogue, cutting, it all emanates from story. And I didn't realize when I started in the industry that by being in that story room and in that story department, that was going to set me up to do so many other things and be successful at them. So I would say that no matter what aspect of the industry that you are interested in going to, focus on story no matter what, learn as much as you can, and always keep your eyes and ears open to learn more.
We have Elsa Chang in the audience, famous visual development artist, Elsa Chang. I wonder if Elsa has a question for Chris Sanders. If not, she's a good example of what Chris was just talking about.
I think, Tony, I'm pretty sure she left when you were just talking forever and didn't ask the question.
Yeah, my love letter to Chris earlier.
I mean, it was sweet. It was sweet.
I've been working on it for a while. That was draft number 3.
Well, guys, we did not get even to the tip of the iceberg. There she goes. Hi, no question. Chris is just awesome. That's what Elsa
he really
That's
is.
nice.
Elsa, you're right.
Yeah. So we do have to wrap up, everybody. We've just gone over an hour, and the questions took us over that, but it was so worth it to hear some of those fun answers. And Chris, I know it took a while to get you here, but I hope we can do a part 2. We did not talk about How to Train Your Dragon. We didn't talk about
DreamWorks at all.
None of the DreamWorks stuff.
That's history. We got to get into that.
So, and kind of the why you left Disney and things like that too. So,
oh
all right. Goodness.
All right. So we're going to schedule another time, and it'll probably be a regular podcast, but we'll release it big and people will listen to it. And I hope so too. So we hope we can get that soon. Thank you, Chris, for being here and being part of our life, just being just an encouragement along the way for the Bancroft Brothers. And I've always enjoyed working with you, buddy. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. It, Chris. It's really fun. And yeah, let's do it again.
Okay.
All right. Now, Tony, as we always end our podcast with a quote that I got from a Glenn Keane drawing, as a matter of fact, that's hanging in my office here somewhere. Here we go. Animate from the heart.
And we're out. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
We could just leave studio.
Have a great time, everybody, on at Lightbox Expo. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Take care.
Bye-bye. And